Olá, tudo bem?
Olá, ótimo. Tenho uma antiga katana japonesa, assinada pelo próprio Kita Ishida e estou interessado em vendê-la.
Tudo bem? Definitivamente não gostaria de recebê-la, isso é certo.
On a normal day in Las Vegas, the gold and silver pawn shop, known from the show Pawn Stars, looks just like any other busy shop. People walk in with all kinds of items: old coins, watches, guns, toys, and strange collectibles. Most of the time, the staff already has a rough idea of what things are worth. But sometimes, something comes in that changes the mood of the entire place. On this day, a man walked in holding a long black cloth wrapped tightly around a mysterious object. He did not smile much and he did not talk too much. He placed the item carefully on the counter as if it was extremely important. The room became quiet for a moment. Rick Harrison, the shop owner, looked up. He has seen thousands of items in his life, so he usually stays calm. But this time something felt different. The man slowly started unwrapping the cloth, and the shape of a sword began to appear. It was a katana, a traditional Japanese sword. The air in the room changed immediately. Even before knowing its value, everyone could feel that this was not an ordinary item. It looked old, carefully made, and very well preserved. The blade reflected light in a strange and beautiful way. Rick did not touch it yet. He just watched it closely. In his years of business, he had learned one thing: when something makes you stop and stare, it usually means trouble or treasure. Sometimes both. The man simply said, "I think this is real," and that one sentence started a journey that would shock everyone in the room. No one knew yet that this simple moment would turn into one of the most extraordinary discoveries the shop had ever seen. Rick Harrison is known for being calm and smart when dealing with rare items. He has handled objects worth thousands, hundreds of thousands, and even millions of dollars. But even for him, this situation felt unusual. He leaned closer to the katana but still did not touch it. That alone showed how serious he was taking it. Usually, Rick picks things up quickly, checks details, and starts guessing value. But this time he stayed still, watching every detail carefully. The blade looked long, slightly curved, and very sharp even after many years. The handle was wrapped in traditional material, showing signs of age and craftsmanship. Chumli and Corey, the other staff members, also gathered around, curious but silent. The atmosphere in the shop became tense. The man who brought the sword explained that it had been in his family for decades. It was wrapped in cloth and kept safe in a box. He believed it could be something special, but he was not fully sure. Rick asked simple questions about where it came from, and the story began to unfold. It was said that the man's grandfather received it from a Japanese source during the time after World War II. Many items changed hands during that period, sometimes as gifts and sometimes under uncertain conditions. Rick listened carefully, knowing that history often plays a big role in valuing items like this. The more the story developed, the more serious the situation became. Rick realized this was not just about selling a sword. It was about history, culture, and possibly something extremely rare. That is when he decided he would need experts to take a closer look. Rick Harrison is known for being calm and smart when dealing with rare items. He has handled objects worth thousands, hundreds of thousands, and even millions of dollars. But even for him, this situation felt unusual. He leaned closer to the katana but still did not touch it. That alone showed how serious he was taking it. Usually, Rick picks things up quickly, checks details, and starts guessing value. But this time he stayed still, watching every detail carefully. The blade looked long, slightly curved, and very sharp even after many years. The handle was wrapped in traditional material, showing signs of age and craftsmanship. Chumli and Corey, the other staff members, also gathered around, curious but silent. The atmosphere in the shop became tense. The man who brought the sword explained that it had been in his family for decades. It was wrapped in cloth and kept safe in a box. He believed it could be something special, but he was not fully sure. Rick asked simple questions about where it came from, and the story began to unfold. It was said that the man's grandfather received it from a Japanese source during the time after World War II. Many items changed hands during that period, sometimes as gifts and sometimes under uncertain conditions. Rick listened carefully, knowing that history often plays a big role in valuing items like this. The more the story developed, the more serious the situation became. Rick realized this was not just about selling a sword. It was about history, culture, and possibly something extremely rare. That is when he decided he would need experts to take a closer look. See, the history behind the sword made everything even more interesting. According to the owner, his grandfather was a U.S. Army officer stationed in Japan after World War II. During that time, Many cultural objects were exchanged, gifted, or transferred between Japanese citizens and American soldiers. Some items were valuable historical artifacts, including swords from old samurai families. The story said that a Japanese man who was connected to a samurai family gave this sword to the officer. He did it because he feared it might be lost or destroyed during the unstable post-war period. He asked the officer to keep it safe. The officer brought it back to the United States and stored it carefully for decades. It stayed hidden in a home in Ohio, wrapped in cloth and placed in a wooden box. Over time, the family forgot how important it might be. Only later did the grandson begin researching it and realize it could be something rare. This kind of story is not unusual when it comes to old Japanese swords. Many important artifacts left Japan during and after the war. Some ended up in private collections and others were lost or forgotten. However, stories alone are not enough to prove value. In the world of antiques, experts must carefully study the object itself. Rick knew this very well. A good story can make something interesting, but only real proof can make it valuable. That is why he called in specialists to examine the sword more closely and determine its true origin and age. The first expert to arrive was a Japanese antique specialist. She carefully examined the sword with great respect. She did not rush or make quick guesses. Instead, she studied the blade slowly under light. She pointed out that the shape and style of the sword suggested it could be very old, possibly from the Kamakura period in Japan, which lasted from around 1185 to 1333. That means the sword could be more than 700 to 800 years old. This shocked everyone in the room. She also noticed details in the hamon and blade structure that matched ancient sword-making techniques. She explained that swords from this period are extremely rare and highly respected in Japanese history. They were made during a time when swordsmithing was at a very high level of skill. She also saw a signature area on the blade, called the nakago, which sometimes contains the name of the sword maker. Because of this, she suggested that a higher-level expert should be called in. She made it clear that this was not a simple item. It required deeper study. Rick immediately understood the seriousness of the situation. If the sword was truly from that period, its value and importance could be far greater than anything they had expected. At this stage, everything was still uncertain, but the possibility alone was enough to change the entire mood in the shop. The situation was no longer about guessing value. It was about discovering history. A second expert arrived, a professor with deep knowledge of Japanese swords. He carefully studied every part of the blade using special tools. He agreed that the sword had characteristics consistent with the late Kamakura period. He also noted that the craftsmanship showed signs of a very famous sword-making school. Then a third expert, a conservator, was called in to safely remove the handle. This step was risky because old swords can be damaged if handled incorrectly. But the team needed to see the hidden signature inside the blade. After careful work, the handle was removed, revealing inscriptions on the nakago. The professor studied them closely and became visibly serious. He believed the sword could be linked to a legendary swordsmith from Japanese history. This changed everything. If true, the sword could be one of the rarest in existence. Only a small number of such blades are known worldwide, many kept in museums or national collections. The room became silent. Even Rick seemed shocked. However, the experts also said that full confirmation would require formal testing in Japan. This meant the sword's identity was not 100% confirmed yet, but all signs pointed toward something extremely valuable and historically important. The tension in the room grew as everyone realized they might be holding a piece of history worth millions. When the topic of value came up, the experts explained that similar authenticated swords have sold for millions of dollars, and in rare cases even tens of millions. One estimate suggested that if fully verified, the sword could reach as high as $50 million in value based on past auction records. This number shocked everyone in the shop. Even Rick Harrison, who has handled extremely expensive items before, was surprised. However, he also understood the reality of the situation. A high value does not mean easy sale. The sword would require years of authentication, legal checks, and possibly even government involvement due to its cultural importance. Instead of making a simple purchase, Rick suggested a partnership to help with authentication and future sale. This was unusual but practical. The owner agreed, hoping the sword would eventually be properly recognized and displayed. In the end, the story was not just about money. It was about history, preservation, and discovery. A simple object wrapped in cloth turned out to possibly be one of the rarest artifacts ever seen in a pawn shop. It reminded everyone that incredible treasures might be hidden in ordinary places, waiting to be found. When an object like this possible ancient katana leaves a pawn shop like the gold and silver pawn shop from Pawn Stars, the story is not actually over. In fact, for experts, collectors, and historians, this is usually where the real work begins. In the show, viewers often only see the negotiation and the excitement of discovery. But in real life, rare items go through long and serious processes after that moment. First, the object must be carefully stored. A sword that might be hundreds of years old cannot just be placed in a drawer or a display case without protection. Temperature, humidity, and handling all matter. Even touching it too much can cause damage over time. That is why museums use special environments to protect old weapons and artifacts. If this katana is truly from the Kamakura period, then it is not just a collectible, it is a cultural treasure. That means its journey after the pawn shop would involve experts in preservation, legal teams, historians, and possibly even government organizations. The owner cannot simply sell it like a normal item. It must first be studied in detail. The process can take months or even years. Many people do not realize how complicated this is. When something extremely rare appears, it becomes part of history itself. It is no longer just private property. It becomes something the world has to carefully understand before any decision is made. That is why Rick's idea of partnership instead of buying it directly actually makes sense. It allows the item to be studied properly without rushing into a decision that could damage its value or historical importance. To understand why this katana is so valuable, you need to understand the deep history behind Japanese swords. In Japan, swords were not just weapons. They were symbols of honor, discipline, and culture. Samurai warriors carried swords as part of their identity. A well-made sword was believed to reflect the soul of the warrior. Among all Japanese swords, the katana is the most famous. It is known for its curved blade, sharp edge, and perfect balance. But the real value comes from how it is made. Traditional swordsmiths used a special process of heating, folding, and hammering steel many times. This made the blade both strong and flexible. Some swords were folded thousands of times during creation. This is why old swords can still be sharp and strong even after hundreds of years. Certain periods in Japanese history produced